They called me barren, and my husband believed them. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of prayers whispered into the cold darkness of our bedchamber. And in the end, he cast me aside like a gown gone out of fashion, sent me to rot in my maiden aunt's manor while he pursued a younger woman with hips built, they said, for birthing sons. I did not weep when the carriage brought me to Thornwell Cottage that wet October. I had no tears left. The shame had calcified inside me, hardened into something sharp and heavy that pressed against my ribs with every breath. My aunt received me with tight lips and tighter silence. She was a widow herself, childless by choice or fate, I never knew which, and she seemed to regard my presence as both an inevitability and an inconvenience. The cottage sat at the edge of a village too small to have a proper name, surrounded by moorland that stretched gray and endless under perpetual clouds. It was the sort of place where women like me came to disappear. The months passed in a rhythm of nothingness. I took to walking the moors in the afternoon, my skirts growing damp and heavy with mist, my boots caked in mud that the housekeeper tutted over each evening. I avoided the village. The whispers followed me even there, carried on the wind perhaps, or simply inscribed in the pitying glances of the shopkeepers and the way young mothers clutched their children closer when I passed. Barren, forsaken, failure, the words had become my name. It was on such an evening, in late March when the world hovered between winter's death and spring's reluctant birth, that he came. I had been sitting in the parlor, half reading a novel I had no interest in, listening to the rain hammer against the windows with a violence that matched something restless inside me. My aunt had retired early with one of her headaches. The fire burned low. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked its measured judgment of passing time, each second another moment of my life slipping away into irrelevance. The knock came sudden and sharp, so forceful it seemed to shake the very frame of the cottage. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Brennan, had also gone to bed, and so I rose myself, my heart inexplicably quickened. We rarely had visitors, and never at this hour. The rain had intensified, and through the wavering glass beside the door I could make out only a dark shape, tall and still. I opened the door. He stood there drenched, his greatcoat black with rain, his hair plastered to his forehead in dark streaks. But it was his eyes that arrested me, held me frozen in the doorway with my hand still on the latch. They were pale, colorless almost, like water over stone, and they looked at me with an intensity that felt like recognition, though I had never seen this man before in my life. There was something else in those eyes, too, something that made my skin prickle with an instinctive unease. They were the eyes of someone who had seen things no living person should see. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, and his voice was low, roughened by cold or emotion I could not place. "I am looking for Mrs. Violet Ashford." "I am she," I replied, though the name felt strange on my tongue. I had been Mrs. Ashford for so long, bound to a man who no longer wanted me, that I sometimes forgot I had ever been anything else. My maiden name, Hartley, seemed to belong to a girl I barely remembered. His gaze moved over my face, searching, assessing. "May I come in? The matter is urgent, and I have traveled a great distance." Every rule of propriety screamed against it. A strange man, alone, at night, with only my elderly aunt sleeping upstairs and a housekeeper who would not wake for cannon fire. But something in his bearing, in the desperate edge beneath his composure, made me step aside. He entered, bringing with him the smell of rain and horses and something else, something faintly medicinal, like the herbs they burn in sick rooms to ward off contagion. I led him to the parlor, conscious of my plain mourning dress, for I had taken to wearing black though no one had died, conscious of the shabby furniture and the faded wallpaper, conscious most of all of his presence behind me, tall and silent as a shadow. Once inside, I gestured to a chair near the fire, but he remained standing, water pooling at his feet on the worn carpet. "You do not know me," he began, "but I know of you. My name is Julian Gray, Earl of Ravenswood." An Earl. I felt a flush of embarrassment at the state of the room, at my own appearance, but his expression held no judgment, only that same strange intensity. "I have come because I need your help," he continued, "or rather, because something in my home needs you specifically." "I do not understand," I said. my voice steadier than I felt. Why would an earl travel through a storm to seek help from a woman he has never met? He moved closer to the fire then, and in the better light I could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 35, with a face that might have been handsome were it not carved with such deep lines of worry and sleeplessness. His clothes, though soaked, were of fine quality, the tailoring impeccable, but there was a wildness about him, barely contained, like a man standing at the edge of a precipice. "Because you are a woman acquainted with sorrow," he said simply, "because your heart has been broken, and you have been cast aside by those who should have cherished you. I am told such things, I see such things, and I need someone with that particular pain." The directness of it stole my breath. "How dare you?" I whispered, but there was no force behind the words. He had named the truth I carried, laid it bare between us like a gutted thing. "Forgive me," he said, though his tone suggested he would not take the words back. "I do not have time for gentle approaches. My home is haunted, Mrs. Ashford. Greymire Hall has been in my family for 300 years, and for the last 6 months it has become unbearable. Doors that slam in empty rooms, footsteps in the corridor at midnight, cold spots that appear and disappear without reason, and a presence, always a presence, that fills the house with such grief it becomes difficult to breathe." I stared at him. "Surely you have sought help from the church, from spiritualists." "I have tried everything." He ran a hand through his wet hair, a gesture of such weariness it made him suddenly seem older. "Every medium, every priest, every occultist who claims to commune with the dead. Some say the house is cursed, others say it is merely old and full of echoes, but none have been able to make it stop. And then, 3 nights ago, something changed." He paused, and I saw his jaw tighten. The spirit spoke to me, or rather, I understood what it wanted, what it has always wanted. It needs a woman. Not just any woman, one who knows what it means to be unwanted, one who understands rejection and abandonment, one who has been hollowed out by loss. And you believe I am that woman. I know you are. His eyes met mine again, and I felt the weight of whatever strange sight he possessed. "I have the gift, Mrs. Ashford, or the curse, depending on how one views it. Since I was a boy, I have seen those who have passed beyond. I see them in the corners of rooms, in the gardens, on the roads. I see the dead, and they see me, and this spirit in my home, this presence that torments every living soul within those walls. It showed me your face. It led me here." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled against the cottage, and I wondered if I had gone mad, if months of isolation had finally cracked something essential in my mind. But he stood there so solid, so utterly real, water dripping from his coat, his chest rising and falling with breath, his strange pale eyes never leaving mine. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Come to Greymire Hall. Stay as my guest. Help me understand what this spirit wants. Help me give it peace. I cannot live in that house as it is. I cannot bring anyone there, cannot marry, cannot continue my line while this presence fills every room with its sorrow and its rage. And if I refuse, then I will leave and trouble you no more. But I do not think you will refuse." His certainty infuriated me and compelled me in equal measure. Why? Why would I abandon what little I have here to chase ghosts in a stranger's home? "Because you are already a ghost, Mrs. Ashford." He said it gently, but the words landed like blows. "You are already haunting your own life, moving through these rooms without purpose or hope. At least at Greymire you would be needed. At least there your pain would serve a purpose." I wanted to strike him. I wanted to order him from my house, but I could not, because every word he spoke was true. I was a ghost. I had been a ghost since the moment my husband's solicitor read the terms of our separation, since the moment I climbed into that carriage and left London behind. I existed, but I did not live. What would be expected of me? I heard myself ask, and even as I spoke I knew I had already decided. Only your presence, your willingness to remain in the house, to allow the spirit to make contact if it wishes. I have servants there, a housekeeper and a small staff. You would have your own rooms, your own space. I ask nothing improper. You ask me to live in a haunted house with a man I do not know, based on claims of seeing the dead and spectral visions. It is madness. Yes, he smiled then, a brief and bitter expression. It is madness. But so is spending the rest of your life in this cottage, waiting to grow old and die in a place where no one remembers your name. At least at Greymire, you might find something. An answer? A purpose? Perhaps even peace. The clock struck 10, each chime echoing in the small room. I thought of my aunt upstairs, of the years stretching ahead, of the moors and the rain and the endless sameness of days. I thought of my husband's face the last time I saw him, blank with relief to be rid of me. I thought of the child I would never hold, the life I would never have, the future that had been taken from me piece by piece until nothing remained but this hollow shell. How soon would you wish me to come? I asked. Tomorrow, if you are willing. My carriage is at the inn. I can return in the morning. I will need to speak with my aunt. Of course. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and I realized he had not been certain of my answer. I will pay you for your time, naturally. Whatever sum you deem appropriate. I do not want your money, I said, surprised by the sharpness in my own voice. If I do this, it is not for payment. Then why? I looked into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood, turning solid matter into ash and air. Because you are right, I am already a ghost, and perhaps it is time to discover what the dead want from me. He left shortly after, promising to return at 10 the following morning. I climbed the stairs to my small bedroom, my mind churning with too many thoughts to name. I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the storm slowly exhaust itself, the rain softening to drizzle, the wind dying to whispers. By dawn, the sky had cleared to a pale gray, and I could see the moors stretching away, endless and empty. My aunt received the news with surprising calm over breakfast. She looked at me across the table, her sharp eyes taking in my sleepless face, my untouched toast. "You are going, then?" she said. It was not a question. "Yes," she nodded slowly. "I cannot say I approve of such a venture, Violet, but neither can I say you should stay. You have been fading since you arrived, like a watercolor left in the sun. Perhaps this Earl and his haunted house will wake something in you, or perhaps it will destroy you entirely. Either way, it is your choice to make." I had not expected her understanding, and it moved me more than I wished to show. "Thank you, Aunt." "Do not thank me yet." She set down her teacup with a precise click. "If this man is a villain or a madman, you will have only yourself to rely upon. Take the pistol from your uncle's study, and write to me each week. If I do not hear from you, I will send for the authorities." At 10 o'clock precisely, the carriage arrived. It was a handsome vehicle, black and well-sprung, with a crest on the door I did not recognize. The Earl himself handed me inside, his touch brief and impersonal, and then we were moving, the cottage falling away behind us, my aunt standing in the doorway like a sentinel. The journey took most of the day. We traveled north through countryside that grew wilder with each mile, the cultivated fields giving way to rougher land, forests of ancient oak and beech, rivers that ran cold and fast over black stones. The Earl sat across from me, mostly silent, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape or lost in some internal distance I could not fathom. I studied him covertly, noting the way his hands gripped his knees, the tension in his jaw, the occasional flicker of something, fear or pain perhaps, that crossed his features when he thought I was not looking. "Tell me about Greymire Hall," I said at one point, needing to break the oppressive silence. He stirred as if waking. "It is old. Built in the 16th century, added to over the generations. My family has always lived there, though not always happily. There are stories, of course. Old houses always have stories. What kind of stories? Suicides, murders, forbidden loves, and secret burials. The usual Gothic fare." He smiled without humor. "My grandfather claimed to have seen a woman in white walking the East Gallery. My father refused to enter the chapel after my mother died there, giving birth to my younger brother. And I have seen far too many things to ever feel at ease in that house. And yet you stay. It is my inheritance, my duty. And until recently, the dead kept to themselves. What changed?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My wife died 6 months ago. The words fell between us, heavy and final. I had not known he was a widower, though I should have guessed. There was a quality to his grief that matched my own, the particular weight of a loss that society expected one to bear with dignity and silence. "I am sorry," I said softly. "Do not be." It was not a happy marriage, but her death seems to have awakened something in the house, or perhaps invited something in. The hauntings began the night of her funeral, and they have grown worse with each passing week. I wanted to ask how she died, but the rigid set of his shoulders warned me against it. Instead, I turned my attention back to the window, watching the light fade as afternoon slipped into evening. We passed through small villages where people stopped to stare at the carriage, through woods so dense the branches met overhead, creating a tunnel of shadow. And always, the road climbed higher, into hills that felt older than time, where the air grew thin and cold. We arrived as the last light was dying from the sky. Greymire Hall rose before us like something conjured from nightmare and longing. All gray stone and dark windows, towers and chimneys silhouetted against a sky the color of bruises. It sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by grounds that had once been formal gardens, but now seemed to be returning to wildness. Box hedges grown shaggy and untrimmed, fountains dry and filled with dead leaves. A lake stretched black and still beyond the west wing, its surface like polished obsidian. The carriage stopped before the main entrance, and I felt my courage waver. The house seemed to watch us, to wait with an intelligence that was not quite human. Every window was dark. No smoke rose from the chimneys. It looked abandoned, though I knew it was not. The Earl helped me down, and I felt the temperature drop as my feet touched the gravel drive. It was colder here, unnaturally so, as if the house existed in its own private winter. "Welcome to Greymire Hall," he said quietly. And then, even more quietly, as if speaking to himself or to something I could not see, "God help us both." The door opened before we reached it, swung inward by unseen hands or perhaps by the housekeeper who materialized in the entrance, a thin woman in black with a face like weathered paper. She looked at me without expression, then at the Earl, and I saw something pass between them, some wordless communication that made my skin prickle. "Mrs. Ashford will be staying in the Rose Room," the Earl said. "Please see that a fire is lit and a tray sent up." The woman nodded and disappeared into the shadows of the house. I followed the Earl inside, my small case of belongings carried by a footman who appeared and vanished like smoke. The entrance hall was vast and cold, floored in black and white marble that gleamed dully in the light of a single candelabra. A grand staircase swept upward into darkness. Portraits lined the walls, generations of grays staring down with eyes that seemed to follow our movement. "I will show you to your room," the Earl said. "Dinner will be at 8, if you feel inclined. Otherwise, I will not trouble you tonight. The house, I am afraid, takes some getting used to." We climbed the stairs, our footsteps echoing. The air smelled of dust and old wood and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. The corridors stretched endlessly, doors upon doors, most of them closed. I tried to mark the turnings in my mind, but quickly lost count. The house was a labyrinth, and I understood with a cold certainty that I could easily become lost in its depths. The Rose Room was in the east wing, a chamber that must have been beautiful once. The walls were papered in faded pink silk, the furniture heavy and dark. A fire had been lit and burned fitfully in the grate, as if the chimney drew poorly. The windows looked out over the lake, and I could see its black expanse reflecting the rising moon. "I hope you will be comfortable," the Earl said from the doorway. "If you need anything, pull the cord. Someone will come." "Lord Ravenswood," I said, turning to face him. "Why do you really think I can help?" He stood very still, and in the firelight his face was all shadow and sharp angles. "Because the spirit showed me your face before I ever knew your name. Because she is angry and sorrowful and lost, and she wants what was taken from her. And because you, Mrs. Ashford, are the only woman I have met who carries the same quality of grief." "She," I repeated. "The ghost is a woman. Yes, I do not know who she was in life, but in death she is unmistakable, and she has chosen you." He left before I could ask anything more, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click that sounded very final. I stood alone in the rose room, listening to the house settle around me, listening to the wind outside and the fire's restless crackling. And beneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, I heard the sound of weeping, distant and endless, as if the walls themselves mourned something they could never name. I did not sleep that first night at Greymire Hall. How could I, with the weeping threading through the walls like a living thing, rising and falling with the wind outside? I lay in the unfamiliar bed, the sheets cold despite the fire, and listened. Sometimes the sound seemed to come from the corridor beyond my door, sometimes from the walls themselves, and once, near dawn, it seemed to come from directly beside my bed, so close I could almost feel breath against my cheek, though when I lit the candle with shaking hands, there was nothing there but shadows and the faint smell of lavender. Morning came gray and reluctant. I rose and dressed in the same traveling gown I had worn the day before, my trunk having not yet been brought up. When I pulled the cord to summon assistance, no one came. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, standing at the window and watching mist roll across the lake like something sentient. Finally, I ventured out into the corridor myself. The house by daylight was hardly less oppressive than it had been in darkness. The walls were paneled in dark wood that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the tall windows. The portraits I had glimpsed the night before now revealed themselves in greater detail. Generations of grays staring out with expressions ranging from stern displeasure to outright melancholy. I found myself searching their faces for some resemblance to the Earl, and found it in the eyes, that same pale intensity, that same quality of seeing too much. I wandered for nearly half an hour before finding my way back to the main staircase. The house was utterly silent. No servants moved through the halls. No sounds of morning activity drifted from below. It was as if I had been left entirely alone in this vast stone shell. But when I descended to the entrance hall, I found the Earl waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He wore riding clothes, his boots mud-splattered, his dark hair wind-tousled. He looked as though he had not slept either, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, and something in his voice suggested relief. "I was not certain you would still be here. Where else would I be? Most guests depart after the first night. I thought perhaps the sounds might have driven you away. I heard the weeping," I admitted, "but I did not run. I gave my word that I would stay." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Come. You should have breakfast, and then, if you are willing, I will show you the house properly. You should know what you have agreed to inhabit." He led me through corridors to a small dining room that faced the gardens. It was warmer here, a fire burning brightly, and a sideboard laid with silver chafing dishes. The housekeeper, the same thin woman from the night before, stood waiting by the wall. "This is Mrs. Calloway," the Earl said. "She manages the household. Mrs. Calloway, Mrs. Ashford will be our guest for the foreseeable future. Please ensure her comfort." The woman inclined her head but did not speak. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, flickered over me with what might have been assessment or judgment. I could not tell which. We ate in near silence, the Earl preoccupied with thoughts he did not share, and I too aware of Mrs. Calloway's presence to attempt conversation. The food was well prepared, but I had little appetite. The house seemed to press in even here, its weight palpable, its atmosphere thick with things unsaid. After breakfast, the Earl kept his promise. He took me through Greymire Hall room by room, and with each new chamber I felt the history of the place settle more heavily on my shoulders. The library with its thousands of books, many so old their spines cracked at a touch. The music room where a pianoforte sat beneath a holland cover, dust thick on its keys. The portrait gallery where generations of dead greys watched our passage with painted eyes. The chapel, small and dark, where his mother had died and where he paused at the threshold but would not enter. "My wife is buried in the churchyard in the village," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "But my family rests here, beneath the chapel floor. Every grey for 300 years. He showed me the ballroom, vast and empty, its chandeliers shrouded in cloth, the conservatory where exotic plants had once grown, but now only dead vines, twisted around cracked glass. The servants' wing, largely abandoned, most of the rooms shut up and unused. The house was too large for the handful of people who occupied it, and it felt the emptiness, like a physical presence. "How many servants do you keep?" I asked as we climbed a narrow staircase to the upper floors. "Only those who are willing to stay. Mrs. Calloway, a cook, 2 maids, a groom for the horses, a groundskeeper who comes 3 days a week but refuses to enter the house." He paused on a landing, looking out a window toward the stables. "I had 20 servants before my wife died. Within a month of the hauntings beginning, all but these few had left. Some gave notice, others simply vanished in the night, leaving their belongings behind. You cannot blame them. I do not." His jaw tightened. "I would leave myself if I could." We reached the 3rd floor, where the corridor grew narrower and the ceilings lower. "These were the old servants' quarters and guest rooms," he explained. "Most have not been used in decades, but there is one room I must show you, the room where the hauntings are strongest." He stopped before a door near the end of the hall. It was plain wood, unremarkable, but the air around it felt different, colder, heavier with expectation. He withdrew a key from his pocket and fitted it to the lock. "This was my wife's room," he said. "She insisted on sleeping apart from me for the last year of our marriage. After her death, I locked it and intended never to enter again. But the spirit seems to center here, and I think you should see it." The lock turned with a harsh click. The door swung inward on silent hinges, and I stepped into a room that was perfectly preserved, as if its occupant had only just stepped out and might return at any moment. It was decorated in shades of cream and gold, expensive and tasteful, but there was something wrong about it, something off. The air was not merely cold, but actively hostile, pressing against my skin with almost physical force. The curtains were drawn, casting everything in amber twilight, and over it all hung that same sweet, rotting smell I had noticed the night before, stronger here, almost overpowering. "Nothing has been touched?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing. The servants will not come in to clean. They say they can feel her anger." I moved further into the room, drawn despite my unease. The bed was made, the coverlet smooth. A dressing table held bottles of perfume and pots of cream. A silver-backed brush with long dark hairs still caught in its bristles. On the nightstand lay a book, a French novel, with a ribbon marking a page 2/3 through. "What was her name?" I asked. "Lenora. Lady Lenora Grey." "How did she die?" The silence stretched so long I thought he would not answer. Then, quietly, almost inaudibly, he said, "She fell from the North Tower, or threw herself. The coroner ruled it an accident, but I have never been certain." I turned to look at him. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. There was such pain in his expression that I nearly went to him, nearly forgot myself, and offered the comfort of touch. But something held me back, some awareness that the boundaries between us must remain clear. "Did you love her?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "No." He met my eyes, and the honesty there was brutal. Our marriage was arranged by our families. She was 18 when we wed. I was nearly 30. She wanted romance and passion and tenderness, all the things I could not give her. And I wanted an heir, stability, continuation of my family line. We made each other profoundly unhappy. "I am sorry. So am I." He looked past me into the room, and I saw him shudder. "But sorry does not quiet the dead, Mrs. Ashford. Sorry does not end hauntings. Do you think it is her, your wife, who haunts this house? I do not know. Sometimes I think yes, that her misery could not be contained even by death. Other times I think it is something older, something that has always been here, that merely used her death as a doorway." We left the room, and he locked it behind us. As we walked back down the corridor, I felt watched, felt the weight of invisible eyes following our movement. The Earl felt it too. I could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his gaze darted to shadows and corners. "There is one more thing you should know," he said as we descended the main staircase. "The spirit is not always passive. Sometimes it is violent." He led me to the drawing room and gestured to a section of wall near the fireplace. I stepped closer and saw what he meant. The wallpaper was torn, long gouges raked through the expensive silk as if by fingernails, though the marks went deeper than any human hand could reach, scoring the plaster beneath. "This happened 3 weeks ago," he said. "I was sitting here reading after dinner. The fire was burning. The room was warm. And suddenly the temperature dropped, and I heard a woman scream, such rage and anguish that my blood turned to ice. The marks appeared as I watched, forming in seconds, the paper shredding as if invisible hands tore at it. Did you see her? See the spirit? No, but I felt her fury like a storm, felt it crash against me until I thought my heart would stop from the force of it. I reached out and touched the torn wallpaper, felt the rough edges, the exposed plaster cold beneath my fingertips. What does she want? I have asked that question 1,000 times. I have pleaded with her to tell me, to show me, to give me some sign of what would bring her peace, but she only weeps and rages and destroys. Until 3 nights ago, when she showed me your face. I pulled my hand back, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill. You said you have the sight, that you see the dead. Why can you not speak with her, learn what she needs? The Earl moved to the window, staring out at the gray day. My gift is not communication. I see them, yes. I have always seen them. The old man who walks the village road each dusk, the child who sits on the stairs in the west wing, the soldier who stands at attention in the portrait gallery. I see them, but they do not see me. Or if they do, they give no sign. They are like echoes, repetitions of something that once was. But this spirit, she is different. She has will. She has purpose. She wants something. And I am powerless to give it because I cannot understand. Perhaps that is why she showed you me. Perhaps she thinks I can give her what you cannot. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw hope and fear in equal measure. That is what I am counting on. The day passed in strange suspension. I spent the afternoon in the library, trying to read, but finding my attention constantly pulled by sounds that might have been the house settling, or might have been footsteps, by shadows that moved at the periphery of vision. The Earl had retreated to his study with estate business, leaving me largely alone. I found I did not mind. Solitude had become my natural state. Dinner was a somber affair, taken again in the small dining room, with Mrs. Calloway serving in silence. The Earl seemed distracted, answering my few attempts at conversation with vague murmurs. I did not press. I was coming to understand that he was a man who carried his burdens alone, who had perhaps never learned how to share them. It was as we finished our coffee that the first incident occurred. The temperature in the room plummeted. One moment the fire burned warm and bright, the next it guttered and nearly died, the flames shrinking to blue flickers. My breath misted in the air. Across from me, the Earl went very still. "She is here," he whispered. I felt it then, the presence he had described. It filled the room like water filling a vessel, pressing against my skin, my lungs, making it hard to draw breath. And with it came emotion so powerful it nearly drove me to my knees. Sorrow, rage, loneliness so deep it felt like drowning. The candles on the table began to flicker wildly, flames bending toward some unfelt wind. And then I heard it, the voice I had heard in the walls the night before, but clearer now, closer, a woman's voice twisted with anguish. "Mine," it whispered. "Mine, taken, lost, mine." "Who are you?" I managed to speak, though my throat felt tight with fear. "What do you want?" The voice rose to a shriek, wordless and terrible, and every window in the room shattered inward in a spray of glass. I threw my arms over my face, felt shards rain down on the table, heard them strike the floor with musical tinkling. The Earl was suddenly beside me, pulling me up, away from the table. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over my shoulders, my arms, checking for injuries. "I am unharmed, only frightened." The presence withdrew as suddenly as it had come. The room warmed, the fire leapt back to full strength, and we stood there among the broken glass, breathing hard, staring at each other. "I am sorry," the Earl said. "I should not have brought you here. This is too dangerous." "No." I surprised myself with the firmness of my voice. "No, I will not leave. Did you hear her? She said mine. She said taken and lost. She is trying to tell us something. You do not understand." He released me, stepping back, running shaking hands through his hair. "She could have killed you. Those windows, the glass. But she did not. I think she is testing me, or trying to communicate. I am not hurt, Lord Ravenswood. I am not leaving." Mrs. Calloway appeared in the doorway, her face impassive despite the destruction around us. "Shall I have the glass cleared, my lord?" "Yes, and board the windows for tonight. We will have them reglazed tomorrow." The housekeeper nodded and withdrew. The Earl and I stood in the wreckage of the dining room, the evening air now pouring in through the empty window frames, carrying the smell of the lake and approaching rain. "You are either very brave or very foolish," he said quietly. "Perhaps both." I met his eyes. "Or perhaps I simply have nothing left to lose. You said I was already a ghost. Well, ghosts do not fear ghosts, do they?" Something shifted in his expression, some guard lowering, some wall cracking. He looked at me as if truly seeing me for the first time, and I felt the air between us change, charged with something I had no name for but recognized, nonetheless. It was attraction, yes, but deeper than that. Recognition. The meeting of two wounded things who understood each other's scars. "I will have you moved to a different room," he said, his voice rough, "one farther from the east wing, from Lenora's chamber. I would prefer to stay where I am. If the spirit wants to reach me, she will find me regardless." "Are you certain?" "I am certain of very little, Lord Ravenswood. But I am here, and I will see this through." He nodded slowly. "Then call me Julian. If we are to face the dead together, we should at least be on given names." "Very well. Julian. And I am Violet." He smiled then, a brief, real smile that transformed his severe face into something younger, almost boyish. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from him, and it did something strange to my heart, made it beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I retired early, pleading fatigue, and returned to the rose room. The fire had been built up and the curtains drawn against the night. I undressed and put on my nightgown, then sat at the window looking out over the moonlit grounds. The lake was a sheet of silver. The garden stretched dark and tangled. And somewhere in this house, a spirit raged and wept and waited. I did not know what I had agreed to. I did not know if I had the strength or courage to face what might come. But I knew that for the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness. I felt purpose. I felt needed. And beneath it all, beneath the fear and uncertainty, I felt the first stirrings of something I thought had died the day my husband sent me away. I felt hope. The weeping began again near midnight. I lay in bed listening to it, trying to discern words in the wordless sounds, trying to understand what this tormented spirit wanted. And slowly, beneath the sorrow, I began to hear something else, a rhythm, a pattern, almost like a song or a chant, repeated over and over. I rose and lit a candle, moving to the door of my room. The weeping was louder in the corridor, echoing off the walls. I stepped out in only my nightgown and bare feet, following the sound like a thread through darkness. The house was freezing, my breath visible in the candlelight, my feet growing numb on the cold floor. But I walked on, turning down corridors I did not remember, passing doors that seemed to multiply in the shadows. And then I came to a stop before a door I knew, a door I had seen that morning. Lenora's room. The weeping was coming from within, and beneath it, that rhythmic chant, clearer now, almost words. I reached for the handle, found it unlocked, though Julian had locked it earlier. The door swung open. The room was as it had been, but different. The curtains were now open, moonlight streaming in, and sitting at the dressing table, her back to me, was a woman. Her dark hair hung loose down her back. Her white nightgown glowed in the pale light. She was real, solid, absolutely present, and as I watched, frozen in the doorway, she raised a hand to the mirror before her and began to write. Her finger traced letters in the condensation that had formed on the glass, though the room was not warm enough for condensation, though this made no earthly sense. I watched the letters form, backward from my perspective, but clear. They lied. The woman turned. I saw her face in the mirror's reflection before I saw it directly, and the shock of it drove the breath from my lungs. She was young, beautiful, with dark eyes and pale skin and a mouth twisted in anguish. But it was not her beauty that arrested me. It was the recognition. I had seen this face before, in the portrait gallery, in the paintings that lined the walls of this house. This was Lenora, Julian's dead wife, and she was looking directly at me. "Help me," she said. And her voice was the voice I had heard in the walls, the voice that had wept and raged. "Help me, sister. They took everything from us. They cast us aside like broken things, but we do not have to remain broken." She stood, and as she did, the room began to change, to shift and blur, the furniture fading, the walls becoming transparent. And I saw, layered over the present, images of the past, fragments of memory or vision. I saw Lenora standing at this very dressing table, weeping. I saw a man, not Julian, but someone else, younger, fair-haired, taking her hands. I saw her pregnant, her belly swollen, her face radiant with hope. And then I saw darkness, blood, her body crumpled at the base of a tower, her neck bent at an impossible angle. I staggered back, my candle falling from nerveless fingers and going out. The visions vanished. The room was empty once more, the dressing table bare, the message gone from the mirror. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that Julian had been right. The haunting was not over. It had only just begun. I ran, fled down the corridor in the darkness, my heart pounding, my mind reeling with images I could not process. I did not know where I was going, knew only that I had to get away, had to find Julian, had to tell him what I had seen. I turned corner after corner, descended stairs, my bare feet slapping against stone and wood. And finally, gasping and trembling, I found myself before a door that stood slightly ajar, light spilling from within. I pushed it open. Julian sat at a desk in what must have been his study, papers spread before him, a lamp burning at his elbow. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes widened at the sight of me, disheveled in my nightgown, my hair loose, my face surely wild with fear. "Violet," he said, rising. "What happened?" I saw her. I saw Lenora. She spoke to me. He came around the desk, his hands reaching for mine, and I let him take them, let him lead me to a chair near the fire. He knelt before me, his eyes searching my face, and I felt the warmth of his hands, the solidity of his presence, anchoring me against the terror that threatened to overwhelm. "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. I told Julian everything as we sat before the fire in his study, the night pressing against the windows, the house settling around us with its familiar creaks and whispers. I told him about following the weeping, about finding Lenora's door unlocked, about seeing her at the dressing table as solid and real as any living woman. I described the message on the mirror, the visions that had overlaid reality, the images of Lenora pregnant and in love with someone who was not her husband, and finally, the terrible vision of her broken body at the tower's base. He listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with each detail, his hands gripping the arms of his chair until his knuckles whitened. When I finished, silence fell between us, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of wind against stone. "She was with child," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I did not know. The visions showed her happy, radiant, and there was a man, younger than you, with fair hair." He took her hands. They seemed to care for each other deeply. Julian stood abruptly, moving to the window, though there was nothing to see but his own reflection in the dark glass. For a long moment, he said nothing, his shoulders rigid, his breathing controlled with visible effort. Then, quietly, he spoke. His name was Thomas Wexford, my younger cousin. He came to stay here 2 years ago, shortly after I married Lenora. He was studying law in London, but took ill with a fever, and his doctors recommended country air for his recovery. He stayed 6 months. I waited, sensing there was more, that he was choosing his words with the care of a man walking across ice. Lenora was lonely. I was often away managing my estates, attending to business. I neglected her shamefully, though I did not see it as neglect at the time. I thought I was fulfilling my duties as a husband by providing for her materially. I did not understand that she needed more than fine gowns and jewels. She needed companionship, affection, someone who listened when she spoke, and your cousin provided those things. He turned from the window, and in the lamplight I saw pain etched deep in every line of his face. I believe so, yes. I was blind to it, or perhaps I did not wish to see. Thomas was charming, attentive, full of life and warmth. Everything I was not. They spent their days together while I buried myself in estate ledgers and correspondence. They rode together, read together, walked the gardens, and I told myself it was innocent, that I was glad she had found a friend. But it was not innocent. I do not know. He returned to his chair, sinking into it heavily. Thomas left in November of that year. He claimed his health was restored, and he needed to return to his studies. Lenora fell into a deep melancholy after his departure. She barely ate, rarely left her room. I thought it was merely her temperament, her tendency toward emotional excess. I did not realize she might have been grieving, or carrying his child. Julian closed his eyes. If she was pregnant, she never told me. We had not shared a bed in months. If she had come to me and claimed the child was mine, I would have known it for a lie. What happened to Thomas? Where is he now? Dead. He died 6 months ago, 3 days before Lenora fell from the tower. A riding accident in London. His horse threw him, and he struck his head on a curbstone. He never woke. The timing, I said slowly, the pieces beginning to fit together in my mind. She learned of his death, and then she died as well, within 3 days. Julian opened his eyes, and they were wet with unshed tears. I did not connect them at the time. I was told of Thomas's death and felt only a distant sadness, the loss of a family member I had not been close to. When Lenora died, I assumed it was another of her dramatic gestures gone wrong. She had threatened to throw herself from various heights before when we argued, though she never actually attempted it. I thought this time she had simply miscalculated. But if she was pregnant with his child, if she had lost the man she loved and had no hope of passing the child off as yours, she may have chosen to end her life rather than face the scandal. Or someone else chose to end it for her. His words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of implication that spread outward, touching everything. The message on the mirror. They lied. Someone lied about how Lenora died. Violet. Someone wanted her death to look like an accident or a suicide. Who? Who would gain from her death? I do not know, but I intend to find out. He stood again, pacing now, his mind clearly racing. Tomorrow I will ride to the village and speak with the doctor who examined her body. I will review the inquest records, and I will write to Thomas's family, discover if he left any letters, any correspondence with Lenora that might reveal the truth. I rose as well, moved by his sudden animation, his shift from passive grief to active purpose. Let me help you. I can search the house, Lenora's room. Perhaps she kept letters, a diary. It is dangerous. You saw what happened tonight. If someone killed Lenora to hide her pregnancy, to protect the family from scandal, they will not welcome investigation. Then we must be careful. I stepped closer to him, driven by an impulse I did not fully understand. Julian, listen to me. Lenora showed herself to me for a reason. She called me sister. She knows what it is to be cast aside, to have everything taken from you. If she was murdered, if someone silenced her to preserve appearances, then she deserves justice, and I am not afraid. He looked down at me, and I was suddenly aware of how close we stood, aware of the firelight playing across his features, aware of the way his gaze moved over my face as if memorizing it. You should be afraid, he said softly. This house has already taken too much. I could not bear it if something happened to you. The words hung between us, charged with meaning beyond their surface. We stood there, neither moving, the moment stretching until it felt like something must break or catch fire. Then he reached up slowly, as if he could not help himself, and tucked a strand of my loose hair behind my ear. The touch was brief, his fingertips barely grazing my cheek, but it sent heat flooding through me. I should return to my room, I whispered. Yes. His hand dropped away, but his eyes remained on mine. But tomorrow we searched together. I left him there and made my way back through the quiet house, my bare feet silent on the floors, my mind churning with everything I had learned and everything I had felt in those last moments. I had come to Greymire Hall expecting ghosts and finding them, but I had not expected this other haunting, this pull toward a man I barely knew, this dangerous warmth that bloomed in my chest whenever he looked at me with those strange, pale eyes. I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the sky slowly lighten, thinking about Lenora and Thomas, about love that could not be spoken, about the cruel strictures of society that made two people's happiness impossible. And I thought about my own marriage, my own years of trying to be what my husband needed, only to be discarded when I failed to perform my primary function. Lenora and I were indeed sisters in our suffering, both of us casualties of a world that valued women only for what they could produce. Morning came with rain, a steady gray downpour that turned the grounds to mud and the lake to a pocked gray surface. I dressed in my simplest gown and went down to breakfast, finding Julian already there, dressed for riding despite the weather. "I am going to the village," he said. "I should return by early afternoon. I have asked Mrs. Calloway to assist you if you wish to search Lenora's room. She has the only other key." "Be careful," I said, and meant it. "And you." He hesitated, then added, "Do not go into that room alone, Violet. Whatever is there, whatever Lenora wants to show you, wait until I return." I promised I would, though part of me chafed at the restriction. After he left, the house fell into its usual oppressive silence. I spent the morning in the library trying to occupy myself with books, but my mind kept returning to that locked room on the 3rd floor, to Lenora's ghost writing on the mirror, to the visions of blood and death. Near noon, Mrs. Calloway found me. "Lord Ravenswood asked me to help you, ma'am," she said in her flat voice. "If you wish to search her ladyship's chamber." "I do. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway." She led me up through the house, her spine straight, her pace steady. On the 3rd floor landing she paused, turning to face me with an expression I could not read. "I should tell you something, ma'am, before we enter. Something his lordship does not know." "Yes?" "Lady Lenora and I spoke, the day before she died. She was in a state, crying, agitated. She begged me to help her, said she needed money to leave, to go somewhere far away. She said they would kill her if she stayed." "Did she say who they were?" "No, ma'am. I thought it was her hysteria speaking. She was prone to dramatics, if you will forgive me saying so. I told her I could not help her without his lordship's permission, and she became very angry. She said I would regret it, that we would all regret it. The next evening, she was dead. Why did you not tell Lord Ravenswood this?" Mrs. Calloway's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. "Because the morning after her death, I found a note on my bed. It said if I spoke of Lady Lenora's request, my own family would suffer. My daughter lives in the village, ma'am, with her 2 small children. I could not risk them." "Who wrote the note?" "I do not know. It was not signed. But someone in this house knew what Lady Lenora had asked of me, and someone wanted to ensure my silence. The implications were chilling. Someone in the household, perhaps even someone still here, had known Lenora planned to flee and had wanted to prevent it, permanently." "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "I will not put you or your family at risk, Mrs. Calloway, but this information may help us understand what happened." She nodded and unlocked Lenora's door. The room beyond was as I had seen it the night before, minus the ghost and the visions. Cold, still, perfectly preserved. Mrs. Calloway stood in the doorway, clearly unwilling to enter, so I stepped inside alone. I began with the dressing table, opening drawers and examining their contents. Perfume bottles, cosmetics, hairpins, all the usual accoutrements of a lady's toilette. Nothing unusual, nothing hidden. I moved to the wardrobe, sorting through gowns and shawls, feeling in pockets, checking for anything concealed in the linings. Again, nothing. It was only when I knelt to check beneath the bed that I found it. A loose floorboard, one edge slightly raised. I pried it up carefully and found a small wooden box beneath. My hands shook as I lifted it out and opened the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon. I pulled one out and unfolded it, my eyes scanning the careful masculine script. "My dearest Lenora," it began, "I count the hours until I can see you again. These days apart are torture, knowing you are trapped in a marriage without love, knowing I cannot claim you openly, as I wish to. But I swear to you, we will find a way. I will speak to Julian. I will make him understand. We will be together, my darling. I will not let society's rules keep us apart." It was signed simply T. Thomas Wexford, Lenora's lover. I read letter after letter, each one building a picture of desperate, doomed love. Thomas promising to find a way for them to be together. Lenora writing of her misery, her loneliness, her growing hope that Thomas would save her. And then, in the later letters, references to a child. "I am with child, Thomas," she had written in a shaking hand. "Your child. I am certain of it. I am terrified and joyful in equal measure. What are we to do? Julian will know it cannot be his. He will cast me out, and the scandal will destroy both our families. But I cannot bring myself to regret it, because this child is born of love, our love, and that makes it precious beyond measure." Thomas's response, dated a week later, was full of plans. He would speak to Julian. He would confess everything. He would take responsibility and marry Lenora himself, damn the scandal, damn his family's disapproval. They would go to America, start fresh, raise their child in freedom. But the final letter, written in Lenora's hand and dated 2 days before her death, told a different story. "Thomas, you are gone. They told me you fell from your horse, that you struck your head, that you died instantly without pain. I do not believe them. I think they killed you. I think they discovered our plan, and they killed you to prevent the scandal. And now they will kill me too. I am writing this in case I do not survive. Let the truth be known. Your cousin Edmund came to me yesterday. He knows about the child. He said, if I do not get rid of it, if I do not end the pregnancy, he will ensure I never leave Greymire alive. He said the family cannot survive another scandal, not after his father's gambling debts nearly destroyed them last year. He needs Julian's support, his money, and he cannot allow my indiscretion to jeopardize that. I am alone, Thomas. I am frightened, and I am running out of time. If you can hear me from wherever you are, know that I loved you. Know that our child was wanted, and know that if I die, it will not be by my own hand. Edmund. Julian had not mentioned any Edmund. I gathered the letters and rose, my heart pounding. Mrs. Calloway still stood in the doorway. Who is Edmund? I asked. Lord Ravenswood's cousin Edmund? Her face paled. Edmund Grey, ma'am. His lordship's cousin and heir, since his lordship has no children. He manages the western estates and visits Greymire several times a year. Where is he now? In London, I believe. He left shortly after Lady Lenora's funeral and has not returned. Does Lord Ravenswood know what you have told me about Lenora's request for help? No, ma'am. As I said, I was threatened into silence. And Edmund, was he here the day Lenora died? Mrs. Calloway's hands twisted in her apron. He was, ma'am. He arrived 2 days before and left the morning after. He said he had urgent business in London. I felt cold certainty settle in my bones. Edmund had killed Lenora, or caused her death. He had known about the pregnancy, known it would create a scandal that might turn Julian against him, might cost him his position as heir and the financial support he needed, and he had silenced her permanently, making it look like an accident. We must tell Lord Ravenswood immediately, I said. But even as I spoke, I heard it. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel, voices in the entrance hall below, and Mrs. Calloway's face went from pale to white as snow. That is not his lordship's carriage, ma'am. She moved to the window, looked down, then turned to me with fear naked in her eyes. It is Mr. Edmund. He has returned. We stood frozen, the letters clutched in my hands, the rain beating against the windows. And from below came the sound of the front door opening, of footsteps in the entrance hall, of a voice I did not know calling out for Mrs. Calloway, for Julian, for anyone. Hide those letters, Mrs. Calloway hissed. If he knows we have them, if he knows we know the truth, he will do to you what he did to her ladyship. My hands moved before my mind could catch up, shoving the letters back into the box back under the floorboard. I replaced the board and stood, smoothing my skirts, trying to control my breathing. Below, Edmund's voice grew louder, more impatient. Where is everyone in this God-forsaken house? Come down, Mrs. Calloway. I know you are here. We descended the stairs, Mrs. Calloway in the lead, me following, my mind racing through options. Edmund stood in the entrance hall, shaking rain from his coat. He was younger than Julian, perhaps 28 or 30, with fair hair and handsome features that would have been pleasing were it not for the cold calculation in his eyes. When he saw me, those eyes narrowed. And who might you be? He asked, his tone sharp. Mrs. Violet Ashford, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Lord Ravenswood's guest. His lips twisted in something that was not quite a smile. How curious. Julian never mentioned taking in house guests. And where is my dear cousin? He rode to the village on business. He should return this afternoon. How convenient. Edmund moved closer, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. What brings you to Greymire, Mrs. Ashford? Not many people willingly stay in a house with such an unfortunate reputation. Lord Ravenswood requested my assistance with a matter. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. A private matter. I see. He turned to Mrs. Calloway. Have a room prepared for me. I will be staying several days. And send word to my cousin that I am here. We have estate business to discuss. Mrs. Calloway nodded and withdrew, leaving me alone with Edmund. He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing prey, and I forced myself to remain still, to show no fear. You are not what I expected, he said finally. When Mrs. Calloway's daughter mentioned Julian had brought a woman to Greymire, I imagined someone very different. Someone younger, perhaps. More decorative. The insult was deliberate, meant to wound. I did not rise to it. Lord Ravenswood and I have a professional arrangement. Nothing more. Of course. Professional. He laughed, a sound without warmth. Tell me, Mrs. Ashford, has my cousin mentioned me? Has he spoken of his family, of the state of his finances, of the rather precarious position this estate occupies? He has mentioned very little. We have not known each other long. Then allow me to enlighten you. Edmund leaned against the wall, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp. Julian is the Earl of Ravenswood, yes, with all the land and title that entails. But he is also a man drowning in debt. His father gambled away a fortune. His mother's medical care before her death cost thousands. And the upkeep of this monstrosity of a house bleeds money every year. Without my management of the Western estates, without the income I generate through careful investment and shrewd dealings, Julian would have lost Greymire years ago. I do not see what this has to do with me. Do you not? He pushed off from the wall, coming to stand directly before me. Julian depends on me. He needs me. And I have been very patient, very loyal, waiting for my eventual inheritance, since he seems unable to produce an heir of his own. But if he were to marry again, if he were to bring in some woman who might influence him against me, who might encourage him to make foolish financial decisions or cut me out of his affairs, well, that would be unfortunate for everyone involved. The threat was clear. I felt my pulse quicken, but kept my expression neutral. I have no designs on Lord Ravenswood or his estate, Mr. Grey. As I said, I am merely a guest. Good. Keep it that way. He stepped back, his manner shifting to false cordiality. Now, I am sure you have things to occupy yourself with, and I have correspondence to attend to. We will speak more at dinner, perhaps. He dismissed me with a wave and headed toward Julian's study. I watched him go, fury and fear warring in my chest. This man had killed Lenora, I was certain of it. Had pushed her from that tower or arranged her fall, and then allowed everyone to believe it was suicide or accident. And now, he stood in this house as if he owned it, threatening me with barely concealed violence should I interfere with his plans. I had to warn Julian. But how? Edmund would be watching, would notice if I tried to send a message to the village. I could only hope that Julian returned soon, before Edmund realized what we had discovered, before he had time to act. I spent the afternoon in the library, pretending to read but actually watching the windows for any sign of Julian's return. The hours crawled past. Edmund remained in the study. Mrs. Calloway went about her duties with a face like stone, and the house settled around us, waiting, the ghost of Lenora hovering unseen but palpably present. It was nearly 4 when I heard Julian's horse in the stable yard. I rose and went to meet him, reaching the entrance hall just as he came through the door, wet and weary from his ride. His eyes found mine, and I saw relief flash across his features. Violet, you are well? I am. But we need to speak privately, immediately. He read the urgency in my face and nodded. My study. But as we turned toward the corridor, Edmund emerged from that very room, a glass of Julian's brandy in his hand and a smile on his face. Cousin, how good to see you. I hope you do not mind that I have made myself at home. You were not here to greet me after all. Edmund, Julian's voice was cold. "I did not know you were coming. A last-minute decision. Business brought me north, and I thought I would take the opportunity to check on the estate. And on you, of course." He glanced at me. "I have met your charming guest, though I must say I am surprised to find you entertaining at Greymire given its current state. Mrs. Ashford is helping me with a private matter." "How mysterious." Edmund's smile widened. "Well, do not let me interrupt. I am sure you and Mrs. Ashford have much to discuss." The words were innocent, but the insinuation clear. Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, merely took my arm and led me past Edmund to a smaller parlor at the back of the house. Once inside with the door closed, he turned to me. "What happened? What did you find?" I told him everything. The letters, Thomas and Lenora's love affair, the pregnancy, Edmund's threat to Lenora, Mrs. Calloway's revelation, and Edmund's arrival today, his veiled warnings to me. Julian listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each word. When I finished, he moved to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked grounds. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I saw his hands clench and unclench at his sides. "I should have seen it," he said finally. "I should have known Edmund was involved. He has always been ambitious, always resented that I inherited the title while he had to scramble for scraps. But I never thought him capable of murder. What will you do?" He turned back to me, and in his eyes I saw something dangerous, something barely controlled. "I will confront him. Tonight, after dinner. I will accuse him openly and see how he responds. Julian, no. If he is willing to kill once, he will kill again. If you confront him without proof, without witnesses, you put yourself at risk. Then what would you have me do? Let him walk free while Lenora's ghost torments this house and her murderer drinks my brandy. We need more evidence. We have the letters, but they only prove the affair and Edmund's threat. We need someone to testify that he was near the tower when Lenora fell. We need to prove he pushed her. And how do we do that?" I met his eyes, an idea forming. "Lenora showed me visions. She has been trying to tell me what happened. Perhaps if I return to her room tonight, if I open myself to her presence, she will show me the truth. She will show me Edmund's guilt in a way we can use. It is too dangerous. I will not have you put yourself at risk for my family's crimes. It is not just your family, Julian." I stepped closer to him, driven by emotion I could no longer contain. "This is about justice for a woman who was silenced, who was murdered for loving the wrong man and carrying his child. This is about exposing a killer before he hurts anyone else. And yes, this is about us, about the chance that perhaps Greymire might finally know peace." "Us," he repeated softly, and the way he said it made my heart stutter. "Yes, us." I reached up and touched his face, the gesture bolder than anything I had ever done, but I was past caring about propriety or caution. "You brought me here because I was needed, because Lenora chose me. But I am staying because I want to help you, because in this house of ghosts and grief, you have made me feel alive again." He caught my hand, holding it against his cheek, his eyes searching mine. "Violet, if anything happened to you, I could not forgive myself. You have become, in these few short days, more important to me than I can say. Then trust me. Trust that I can do this. And tomorrow together, we will take what we learn, and we will see that Edmund answers for what he has done." He pulled me closer, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me, wanted him to kiss me with an intensity that frightened me. But he only pressed his forehead to mine, breathing hard, his hands trembling where they gripped my shoulders. "After dinner," he said. "We will do this after dinner, but I will be nearby. If there is any danger, any sign that Edmund knows what we are planning, you must call for me immediately." "I will. I promise." Dinner that night was an exercise in controlled tension. The three of us sat at Julian's table, making small talk that meant nothing, while currents of suspicion and fear ran beneath every word. Edmund played the charming cousin, telling stories of London society, asking after estate business with an air of proprietary concern. Julian responded with cold politeness, and I said as little as possible, watching Edmund for any sign that he suspected what we knew. When the meal finally ended, I pleaded fatigue and retired to my room. But I did not sleep. I waited until the house fell silent, until I heard Edmund's footsteps pass my door on the way to his own chamber, until Julian's tread sounded in the corridor outside, pausing briefly to ensure I was alone before moving on. Then I rose, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and made my way through the dark house to Lenora's room. The door was unlocked, as I had left it. I stepped inside, my candle throwing wild shadows on the walls. The air was freezing, colder even than the rest of the house, and that same sweet, rotting smell hung heavy in the darkness. "Lenora," I said softly into the silence, "I know what Edmund did. I know he killed you, but I need proof. I need you to show me what happened that night. Please, help me give you justice." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the candle flame guttered and went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. I heard breathing that was not my own, felt a presence move close, felt the brush of fingers against my face, my hair, and the visions came. I saw Lenora climbing the stairs to the north tower, her face desperate, her hand pressed to her belly where her child grew. I saw Edmund following behind, his expression cold. I heard their voices, saw their confrontation at the top of the tower, the window open behind them to the stormy night. "Get rid of it," Edmund said. "End the pregnancy or I will end you. I cannot, I will not. This is Thomas's child. It is all I have left of him." Lenora's voice was raw with grief. "Thomas is dead because he was a fool, and you will be dead too if you do not listen. The family cannot survive this scandal. Julian will not support me financially if you disgrace him. I need his patronage, Lenora. I will not let your weakness destroy what I have built. Then I will leave. I will go somewhere you cannot find me. I will have this baby and raise it myself. You will do no such thing." And he lunged. I saw it happen as if I stood there, saw Edmund grab Lenora, saw her struggle, saw him force her toward the window. She fought, screaming, her hands clawing at his face, his arms. But he was stronger. He pushed her up onto the windowsill, held her there as she begged for her life, for her child's life. "Please, Edmund, please, I am family. You are a problem, and problems must be solved." He released her. She fell, and I fell with her, felt the rush of air, the terrible moment of knowing death was coming, felt the impact that shattered bone and stopped breath. I came back to myself on the floor of Lenora's room, gasping, shaking violently. A woman knelt beside me, solid and real in the darkness. Lenora, her ghost but present, visible, her dark eyes filled with tears. "You saw," she said. "You know the truth. I know. I will tell Julian. We will make Edmund pay for what he did to you. It is not enough." Her voice was fierce. He must confess. He must admit his crime before witnesses. He must face the same terror I faced. How? How can we force his confession? She smiled, and it was terrible to see. "I am not the only ghost in Greymire Hall. There are others who died by violence, by injustice. They will help me. They have been waiting for someone to ask. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow night, bring Julian and Edmund to the North Tower. Tell Edmund you have found something there, something he needs to see. Once he is there, once he is at the window where he pushed me, I will show him what awaits those who murder in darkness. I will show him every soul he has wronged, and he will confess, or he will join us in the spaces between." The vision was fading, Lenora with it, dissolving back into shadow and cold air, but her final words hung in the room like a promise. "Tomorrow night, the tower, justice will be served." And then I was alone, my candle relighting itself with a sudden flare, the room returning to its empty state. I sat on the floor, my heart pounding, my mind reeling with what I had seen and what I had promised. Tomorrow night, Edmund Grey would face the consequences of his crime, and I would be there to witness it. I found Julian in his study, though it was past midnight and the house had fallen into the heavy silence that precedes dawn. He sat before the dying fire, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him, his head in his hands. When I entered, he looked up, and the relief that flooded his face told me he had been waiting, worrying, perhaps imagining me fall into the same fate as Lenora. "I saw it," I said without preamble. "I saw Edmund push her from the tower. I saw him murder her." He rose and came to me, his hands gripping my arms as if to assure himself I was real and whole. "Tell me everything." I recounted the vision in detail, sparing nothing. Edmund's threats, Lenora's desperate pleas, the moment he released her and let her fall. Julian listened with a face like carved stone, but I saw his hands trembling, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw as he fought to control his rage. When I finished, he turned away, moving to the window, though there was nothing to see but darkness and rain. "I knew Edmund was ambitious," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I knew he resented me, envied the title and the estate. But to kill an innocent woman, to murder his own cousin's wife, to push her to her death while she begged for mercy." He broke off, his shoulders rigid. "I will see him hang for this, Violet. I swear it on my life." "Lenora has a plan," I said quietly. "She wants us to bring Edmund to the tower tomorrow night. She says she will force his confession, that other spirits will help her show him the consequences of what he has done." Julian turned back to me, and I saw fear naked in his eyes. "No, I will not allow you to put yourself in danger again. I will handle Edmund myself. I will take this to the magistrate, present the evidence we have." "What evidence?" "The letters prove an affair and Edmund's threats, but they do not prove he was at the tower when Lenora fell. We have no witnesses, no physical proof. Any magistrate would say it is circumstantial, that a man cannot be convicted on the word of ghosts and visions. Then I will beat the confession out of him myself, and be arrested for assault or murder? Julian, think. Edmund is clever. He has spent 6 months covering his crime, letting everyone believe Lenora's death was suicide or accident. If we move against him without absolute proof, he will escape justice. But if we do as Lenora asks, if we bring him to the place of his crime and let her confront him with what he has done, he may break. He may confess before witnesses. What witnesses? It will be only the 3 of us in that tower. I thought quickly. Mrs. Calloway, she already knows Edmund threatened Lenora. If we tell her what we have learned, she may be willing to testify, especially if Edmund confesses in her presence. And perhaps we could bring the doctor from the village, the one who examined Lenora's body. Tell him we have new information about the death and need him present as a medical authority. Julian considered this, his mind clearly working through the possibilities. It could work, he said slowly. If Edmund is confronted with the supernatural, with Lenora's ghost manifesting before him, he may panic enough to admit his crime. And if we have witnesses present, his confession will hold legal weight. Then it is settled. Tomorrow we make our preparations. We tell Mrs. Calloway and secure the doctor's attendance. And tomorrow night, we end this. He moved closer to me, and in the firelight I could see exhaustion and determination warring in his features. "You have more courage than any woman I have known," he said softly. "More courage than I deserve. I am not courageous, Julian. I am only doing what must be done. No." He reached up and cupped my face in his hands, the gesture achingly tender. "You are extraordinary. You came to this house broken, as I was broken, and yet you have fought for justice, for a woman you never knew. You have faced ghosts and murderers without flinching. You have given me hope when I thought I would drown in this darkness." His words undid something in me, some final barrier I had been maintaining between us. I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing against the rush of emotion that threatened to overwhelm. When I opened them again, his face was close to mine, his breath warm against my lips. "Violet," he whispered, and I heard everything he could not say in that single word. All his longing, his fear, his desperate need for connection. I kissed him, or perhaps he kissed me. I was never certain who moved first, only that suddenly his mouth was on mine and his arms were around me, and I was pressed against the hard length of his body with an urgency that bordered on violence. It was not a gentle kiss, not the careful courtship embrace society prescribed. It was hunger and desperation, the meeting of 2 people who had been alone too long, who had suffered too much, who needed to feel alive and wanted and whole. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "I have wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing in your aunt's doorway," he said. "You looked at me with such wariness, such pride despite your circumstances, and I thought I have never seen anyone so beautiful. I am not beautiful. My husband made that very clear when he sent me away. Your husband was a fool. Julian pulled back enough to look at me, his pale eyes fierce. You are beautiful, Violet. Not in the simpering, decorative way society values, but in something deeper. In strength, in resilience, in the way you refuse to be diminished by those who tried to break you. I felt tears sting my eyes. No one had spoken to me this way before. No one had seen me as anything but a failure, a woman who could not fulfill her most basic purpose. But Julian looked at me as if I were precious, as if my scars made me more valuable rather than less. When this is over, he said, his voice low and urgent. When Edmund is brought to justice and Lenora's ghost is at peace, I am going to ask you to stay, not as a guest, not as someone helping with a haunting, but as my wife, if you will have me. The words hung between us, impossible and perfect. I could not speak around the tightness in my throat, could only nod, my hands fisting in his shirt as if I could anchor myself to this moment, to this man, to this unexpected chance at happiness. We stood there holding each other as the fire burned down to embers, as the clock struck 2 and then 3. And when he finally walked me back to my room, his hand warm in mine, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt cherished. Morning came too quickly. I woke to gray light filtering through the curtains and the sound of rain still drumming against the windows. For a moment, I lay still, reliving the night before. Julian's kiss, his proposal, the warmth of his arms around me. Then reality reasserted itself. Today, we had to prepare for the confrontation with Edmund. Today, we set in motion events that could end in justice or disaster. I dressed quickly and went down to breakfast, finding Julian already there with Mrs. Calloway. They both looked up as I entered, and I saw that the housekeeper's face was pinched with worry. I have told Mrs. Calloway what we discovered, Julian said, and what we plan to do tonight. The housekeeper twisted her hands in her apron. It is dangerous, ma'am. If Mr. Edmund realizes what you are about, if he suspects a trap, he is capable of anything. I have been thinking all morning about Lady Lenora's request to me, about the fear in her eyes. She knew he would kill her, and she was right. That is why we need you there tonight, I said gently. As a witness, if Edmund confesses, if he admits to pushing Lenora from the tower, your testimony will help ensure he faces trial. But if he does not confess, if the spirits cannot force his hand, then we are simply 3 people accusing a man of murder with no proof beyond letters and visions. He will deny everything. He will claim we are mad, that grief has driven his lordship to delusion. Then we must ensure the spirits can reach him. I looked at Julian. Have you sent for the doctor? I sent a rider at first light. Dr. Pemberton should arrive this afternoon. I told him only that we have new information about Lady Lenora's death and require his medical expertise. Good. And Edmund? Does he suspect anything? He has kept to his room this morning, thank God. I do not think I could sit across from him at breakfast and maintain civility. We spent the rest of the morning in careful preparation. Julian retrieved Lenora's letters from their hiding place and locked them in his study safe. Mrs. Calloway was instructed to prepare the north tower, ensuring the door was unlocked and candles placed in the stairwell. And I was tasked with the most difficult job of all, convincing Edmund to come to the tower that night. I found him in the library after lunch, reading through estate ledgers with an air of proprietary interest that made my skin crawl. He looked up as I entered, his handsome face arranging itself into a pleasant smile that did not reach his eyes. Mrs. Ashford, to what do I owe the pleasure? I need to speak with you about something I found, I said, keeping my voice steady. Something that concerns Lady Lenora's death. His expression did not change, but I saw his fingers tighten on the ledger. Indeed. And what might that be? I found letters, Mr. Gray, hidden in her room. Letters that suggest her death was not an accident. I see. He closed the ledger with deliberate care. And you are sharing this information with me, rather than my cousin, because the letters mention you. They suggest you had knowledge of certain circumstances surrounding her death. I thought it only fair to allow you the opportunity to explain before I bring them to Lord Ravenswood's attention. He stood, moving around the desk toward me with the lazy confidence of a predator who does not yet recognize a trap. What exactly do these letters say? I would prefer to show you rather than tell you. I have asked Lord Ravenswood and Dr. Pemberton to meet us in the North Tower tonight at 9 o'clock. The letters are hidden there, in the place where Lady Lenora fell. I thought it appropriate that we discuss their contents in that location. Edmund studied me for a long moment, and I saw calculation moving behind his eyes. He was weighing the risk of not attending against the risk that I might actually have evidence damaging to him. Finally, he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who believes himself untouchable. Very well, Mrs. Ashford. I will attend your little meeting. Though I must warn you, if this is some attempt to embarrass me or damage my relationship with my cousin, you will find I am not a man who forgives easily. I only want the truth, Mr. Grey. I am sure you want the same. I left him there and found Julian in his study, my hands shaking with reaction to the confrontation. He pulled me into his arms immediately, holding me tight. It is done, I said against his shoulder. He will come tonight. He thinks I have the letters hidden in the tower, that I am trying to expose him. He is confident enough in his ability to control the situation that he sees no danger. Or he plans to silence us all once we are there, Julian said grimly. The tower is isolated. If he brought a weapon, if he intended violence, it would be 3 against 1, and he is a younger, stronger man than I. Which is why we must ensure he does not get the chance. Mrs. Calloway will be outside the tower door. Dr. Pemberton will be with us, and Lenora's spirit will do what she has promised. We have to trust in that. Dr. Pemberton arrived mid-afternoon, a stout man of middle years with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Julian met with him privately first, explaining what we had discovered and what we hoped to prove. When they emerged from the study, the doctor looked grave but determined. If what you suspect is true, Lord Ravenswood, then justice must be served, he said. I examined Lady Lenora's body. The injuries were consistent with a fall, yes, but they could equally have been consistent with being pushed. At the time, I noted bruising on her upper arms, as if someone had gripped her forcefully, but the coroner ruled it irrelevant. If Mr. Edmund Grey did indeed murder her, I will do everything in my power to see him answer for it. The hours until 9 o'clock crawled past with agonizing slowness. I tried to occupy myself with reading, but could not focus. I paced the rose room, watching the light fade from the sky, watching rain give way to clearing, and then to a cold, clear night where stars emerged like ice chips against black velvet. Julian came to me an hour before the appointed time, his face drawn with tension. Are you certain you want to do this? He asked. It is not too late to change course. We could take the letters to the magistrate tomorrow, let the law handle Edmund, and give him time to flee, to destroy evidence, to create alibis and lies that will shield him from consequences. I shook my head. No, this ends tonight, for Lenora, for every woman who has been silenced and dismissed and murdered by men who believed themselves above judgment. He pulled me close, and we stood together in the gathering darkness, drawing strength from each other. Then, as the clock struck 9:15, we made our way through the house to the North Tower. The tower was in the oldest part of Greymire Hall, accessed through a narrow corridor that branched off from the 3rd floor. The door stood open, candlelight flickering within, casting grotesque shadows up the spiral staircase that climbed into darkness above. Mrs. Calloway waited outside, her face pale but resolute. I will stay here, she said quietly. If Mr. Edmund tries to leave before confessing, I will bar his way. Be careful, I told her. He is dangerous. So are ghosts, ma'am. And I suspect Lady Lenora is the more dangerous of the two tonight. Dr. Pemberton was already at the top of the tower, having climbed ahead to examine the window from which Lenora had fallen. He stood looking out into the night, his medical bag at his feet, his expression troubled. The height is significant, he said as Julian and I joined him. A fall from here would almost certainly be fatal, and the window is wide enough that someone could easily have been pushed through it. The room itself was small and circular, bare stone walls rising to a conical ceiling. There was no furniture, no decoration, only the window opening onto the night and the sound of wind whistling through the gaps in the stonework. It was bitterly cold, far colder than the rest of the house, and that familiar smell of sweet rot hung heavy in the air. We did not have long to wait. At precisely 9 o'clock, Footsteps sounded on the stairs below, and Edmund emerged into the tower room. He looked from me to Julian to Dr. Pemberton, his expression carefully neutral. "Quite the gathering," he said lightly. "I hope this is important, cousin. I have correspondence that requires my attention." "It is important," Julian replied, his voice hard as stone. "Perhaps the most important conversation we will ever have." Edmund's eyes narrowed. "Very well. Mrs. Ashford mentioned letters. Where are they?" I stepped forward. "I lied to you, Mr. Grey. There are no letters hidden in this tower. But there is something else here. Something that has been waiting 6 months to confront you with what you did. I do not know what you are talking about. Do you not?" I moved closer to the window, to the exact spot where Lenora had stood when Edmund pushed her. "This is where you murdered Lady Lenora. This is where you grabbed her, forced her to the window, and released her to fall to her death. This is where you killed your pregnant cousin and let everyone believe it was an accident." The color drained from Edmund's face. "You are mad. All of you. I was nowhere near this tower the night Lenora died." "You are lying," Julian said, and his voice was terrible in its controlled fury. "We have her letters. We know about Thomas, about the child, about your threats to silence her if she did not end the pregnancy. We know everything, Edmund. Letters prove nothing." Edmund backed toward the stairs, but Dr. Pemberton had moved to block the way. "You cannot accuse me of murder based on letters and delusions. I will not stand here and listen to this." "Then listen to her," I said. The temperature plummeted. The candles guttered and went out, plunging us into darkness, broken only by moonlight streaming through the window. And in that pale light, she appeared. Lenora materialized beside the window, as solid and real as she had been in life. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her white nightgown rippled in a wind that did not exist, and her eyes, full of rage and sorrow, fixed on Edmund with an intensity that made him stagger backward. "No," he whispered. "No, you are dead. You are gone. Did you think death would silence me?" Lenora's voice filled the tower, echoing off the stones. "Did you think I would let you walk free while my child and I lay cold in the ground?" "It was necessary," Edmund said, and I heard panic creeping into his voice. "You would have destroyed everything. The scandal would have ruined Julian's reputation, cost him his position in society. I would have lost access to the estate funds, lost my own prospects. I had no choice." "You had a choice," she hissed. "You could have let me go. Let me disappear with my child. Let me live. But you chose murder instead. You chose to stand in this very spot and push me to my death while I begged for mercy. It was quick. You did not suffer long. I suffered every second of the fall, knowing I was dying, knowing my child would die with me, knowing the man I loved was already dead, and you had probably killed him too." Edmund's face went white. "I had nothing to do with Thomas's death. That was an accident." "Was it?" Lenora moved closer, and Edmund pressed back against the wall. "Or did you arrange it? Pay someone to spook his horse, to ensure he fell in just the right way? You needed him gone. He was going to expose the affair, claim the child, marry me. You could not allow that. Prove it," Edmund spat. "You are a ghost, a phantom. Your word means nothing. Then perhaps you will believe them." Other shapes began to materialize in the tower. An old man in servant's livery, his throat cut, blood staining his collar. A young woman in a maid's uniform, her face blue and swollen as if she had been strangled. A child, no more than 6 or 7, his small body broken and twisted. One by one they appeared, filling the tower, pressing close around Edmund until he was surrounded by the dead. "Who are they?" Dr. Pemberton breathed, his face ashen. "Those who died by violence in this house," Julian said quietly. "Those who were silenced, buried, forgotten. They did not speak, but their presence was accusation enough." Edmund turned in wild circles, his composure finally cracking, his hands raised as if to ward off blows. "Get away from me. All of you. Get away." "Confess," Lenora said. "Tell them what you did to me. Tell them how you pushed me from this window. Tell them or join us in the darkness between worlds. I will not. You cannot make me." She smiled, and it was the most terrible thing I had ever seen. "Can I not?" The spirits moved as one, reaching for Edmund with translucent hands. He screamed, batting at them, but his hands passed through their forms without touching, and where they touched him, he flinched as if burned, as if their ghostly fingers seared his flesh. "Stop," he gasped. "Please stop. Confess." He fell to his knees, and I saw tears streaming down his face, saw the proud, arrogant man reduced to a sobbing wreck. I did it. I killed her. I pushed Lenora from this window because she would not end the pregnancy, would not give up Thomas's bastard child. I could not let her destroy Julian's reputation. I needed his support. I needed his money. So I killed her and made it look like suicide. I killed her, and I do not regret it because it was necessary. The silence that followed was absolute. The ghosts faded, dissolving back into shadow and air. Only Lenora remained, looking down at Edmund with an expression I could not read. "Thank you," she said softly. And then, to me, "Thank you, sister. You have given me peace." She turned to Julian, and her face softened. "I am sorry I could not be the wife you deserved. Sorry I brought scandal and sorrow to your house. But she can be." She placed a ghostly hand over her heart, then pointed to me. "She is strong where I was weak. She will love you as I could not. Be happy, Julian. You have earned it." And then she was gone, fading into moonlight and memory, her presence lifting from the house like a weight removed. The tower was suddenly warmer, the oppressive atmosphere dissipated. Only the living remained. Julian and I and Dr. Pemberton and Edmund, still kneeling on the stone floor, broken and weeping. Mrs. Calloway appeared in the doorway, having witnessed everything from the stairs. Her face was grim but satisfied. "I heard it all, my lord. Every word of his confession." "As did I," Dr. Pemberton said. "I will testify to what occurred here tonight. Edmund Grey murdered Lady Lenora, and I am prepared to swear to that before any magistrate in England." Julian moved to stand over his cousin, and his face was carved from ice. "You will be arrested tonight. You will stand trial for murder, and you will hang for what you did to Lenora and her child." Edmund looked up at him, and all the fight had gone out of him. "I know," he said dully. "I know." The constable was summoned from the village. Edmund was taken into custody within the hour, his hands bound, his head bowed, as he was led from Greymire Hall to face justice. Dr. Pemberton and Mrs. Calloway both gave statements that night, and I added my own testimony about the letters and visions. By dawn, the machinery of law was in motion, and Edmund's fate was sealed. Julian and I stood at the window of his study, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house felt different already, lighter, as if years of accumulated sorrow had been lifted away. Outside, birds sang in the gardens. The lake reflected the morning light. And for the first time since I had arrived at Greymire Hall, I felt genuine warmth from the sun on my face. "It is over," Julian said quietly. "Lenora is at peace. Edmund will answer for his crimes, and we are free." I leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. I thought of everything that had led me to this moment. My failed marriage, my exile to my aunt's cottage, the night Julian had appeared on my doorstep with his haunted eyes and impossible request. I thought of Lenora and Thomas and the love they had been denied, and I thought of the future that stretched before us now, full of possibility. "Marry me," Julian said into my hair. "Not someday. Not when this is over and the scandal has died down. Now. Tomorrow. As soon as the bans can be read. I have wasted too much of my life already. I will not waste another day without you." "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a key turning in a lock, opening doors I had thought sealed forever. "Yes, Julian, I will marry you." He turned me in his arms and kissed me, gentle and deep, a kiss that promised everything I had ever wanted and never dared to hope for. And as the sun rose over Greymire Hall, burning away the last shadows of night, I understood that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not in ballrooms or gardens, but in darkness and grief and the courage to face ghosts together. We had been broken, both of us, cast aside, deemed failures, left to fade into obscurity. But we had found each other in a haunted house, and in facing the dead, we had learned to live again. And that, I thought, was the truest kind of resurrection. The weeks that followed Edmund's arrest passed in a strange suspension between the old life I had known and the new one taking shape around me. Julian insisted I stay at Greymire Hall, despite the impropriety, and I found I had no desire to return to my aunt's cottage even for appearances. The house that had once felt oppressive with grief and rage now breathed with a different energy, quieter, gentler, as if years of accumulated sorrow had finally been released. The haunting stopped completely the night of Edmund's confession. No more weeping in the walls, no more cold spots or slamming doors, no more sense of invisible eyes watching from dark corners. The servants who had fled began to return, drawn by word that Greymire Hall was finally at peace. Within a fortnight, we had a full staff again, and the house began to wake from its long sleep. Windows were thrown open to let in spring air. Holland covers were removed from furniture. The gardens were tended, and slowly, room by room, Greymire transformed from a monument to grief into something that felt almost like a home. I wrote to my aunt, explaining that I would be staying indefinitely, that Lord Ravenswood and I were to be married as soon as the banns were read. Her response came within days, brief and unsentimental as always, but I detected approval between the lines. "You have found your purpose then," she wrote. "I am glad. You were wasting away here, and I had begun to fear you would simply fade into nothing. Whatever this Earl has given you, hold fast to it. You deserve happiness, Violet, though I know you have never believed it." I read her words multiple times, feeling emotion tighten my throat. She was right. I had never believed I deserved happiness, had accepted my husband's rejection as the natural consequence of my failure. But Julian looked at me as if I were precious, as if my inability to bear children was irrelevant to my worth. And slowly, day by day, I was beginning to believe him. Edmund's trial was set for late May. The scandal rocked London society when news of the charges became public. A gentleman of good family, heir to an earldom, accused of murdering his cousin's wife to prevent scandal and protect his financial interests. The newspapers seized upon it with gleeful horror, printing lurid accounts that bore only passing resemblance to the truth. But the evidence was damning. The letters, Mrs. Calloway's testimony about Lenora's fear and Edmund's threats, Dr. Pemberton's medical opinion that the injuries could indicate murder rather than suicide, and most damningly, Edmund's own confession, witnessed by 4 people in that tower room. Julian was required to attend the trial and give evidence. I went with him despite his protests, unwilling to let him face the ordeal alone. We sat in the public gallery and listened as the prosecution laid out the case methodically and brutally. Edmund's defense attempted to claim temporary insanity, that grief over Thomas's death had driven him to madness. But the jury was unmoved. They deliberated less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Edmund was sentenced to hang. Julian showed no emotion when the sentence was pronounced, but I felt his hand tighten on mine, felt the tremor that ran through him. Whatever Edmund had done, he was still family, still the boy Julian had known since childhood. The betrayal cut deep, and I knew it would take time for those wounds to fully heal. We did not stay in London for the execution. We returned to Greymire the day after the sentencing, both of us exhausted and ready to be done with courts and crowds and the weight of public scrutiny. As our carriage rolled up the drive toward the house, I felt something settle in my chest, something that took me a moment to identify. Relief. I was coming home. The banns had been read in the village church while we were in London. We were married on a brilliant June morning, with wildflowers blooming in the gardens and sunlight streaming through the chapel windows. It was a small ceremony, just Mrs. Calloway and a few of the household staff as witnesses, the village rector presiding. I wore a simple gown of cream silk that Julian had commissioned from a London dressmaker, and I carried roses from the Greymire gardens that Mrs. Calloway had cut that morning. Julian stood waiting for me at the altar, and when I saw his face, saw the love and wonder there as I walked toward him, I felt the last pieces of my broken heart knit back together. This man had seen me at my lowest, had witnessed my fears and failures, and had chosen me anyway, had asked me to be his wife, not because I could give him heirs or improve his social standing, but because he loved me for exactly who I was. The rector spoke the familiar words of the marriage service. and we made our vows to each other in voices steady with certainty. When Julian slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple gold band engraved with both our initials, I felt the weight of my previous marriage fall away. I was no longer the discarded wife of a viscount who had deemed me worthless. I was Violet Grey, Countess of Ravenswood, beloved and chosen and whole. The kiss that sealed our marriage was gentle, reverent, and when we turned to face the handful of witnesses, I saw Mrs. Calloway dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the stern housekeeper, it seemed, could be moved by romance. We held a small wedding breakfast in the dining room, the same room where windows had shattered the night of my arrival. But now it was filled with flowers and sunlight, and when I looked at the repaired windows, I felt only gratitude that we had survived to reach this moment. As we ate and drank champagne and accepted the shy congratulations of the staff, I caught sight of something from the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement near the doorway, a suggestion of white fabric, dark hair. Lenora stood there for just a moment, smiling, her hand raised in what might have been blessing or farewell. Then she faded, and I knew with absolute certainty that she was truly at peace now, that whatever had bound her to Greymire Hall had finally released her. I raised my glass slightly in silent acknowledgement, and Julian, who had seen nothing but noticed my gesture, squeezed my hand beneath the table. Our wedding night was everything I had never known I wanted. Julian was patient and tender, taking time to learn my body, to discover what brought me pleasure, to make me feel cherished in ways my first husband had never attempted. We came together in his great bed with the windows open to the summer night, and afterward we lay tangled in the sheets, talking quietly about our hopes and dreams for the future. "I need to tell you something," I said eventually, my head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Something I am afraid to say, but know I must." "Tell me anything," he murmured into my hair. "I may never give you children, Julian. The doctors told my first husband that the failure was mine, that my womb is somehow flawed. I do not know if they were right, but I need you to understand that by marrying me, you may have given up your chance at an heir." He was quiet for a moment, and I felt fear flutter in my chest. Then he tipped my face up to look at him, and his eyes were fierce. "Listen to me carefully, Violet. I married you because I love you. Not for children, not for heirs, not to continue some grand family line. If we are blessed with children, I will be grateful. If we are not, I will still count myself the most fortunate man in England because I have you. Edmund was my heir, and look how that turned out. Blood and lineage mean nothing compared to love and character. But the estate, the title, they will pass to some distant cousin when you die. Let them." He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. "I would rather spend 50 years childless with you than have a dozen sons with a woman I did not love. You are enough, Violet. You have always been enough." I wept then, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of being accepted completely, without reservation or condition. And when he made love to me again, slower this time, worshipful, I understood that I had finally found what I had been seeking all along. Not vindication or revenge or even justice, simply love, offered freely and without price. The summer passed in gentle contentment. We settled into married life with an ease that surprised us both, discovering rhythms and routines that suited us. Julian worked on restoring the estate's finances, undoing years of his father's mismanagement and Edmund's subtle embezzlement. I took over management of the household, working with Mrs. Calloway to update and modernize where needed while respecting the house's history. And in the evenings we would walk the grounds together, watching the sun set over the lake, or sit in the library reading aloud to each other, or simply be together in companionable silence. I began to write, something I had never had time or energy for during my first marriage. I filled notebooks with observations about the house, about the countryside, about the people who lived and worked at Greymire. Julian encouraged me, had a desk moved into the library for my use, ensured I had uninterrupted hours to pursue my work. What I wrote was nothing of great literary merit, merely my own thoughts and experiences, but it gave me purpose beyond household management. It made me feel like a person with value beyond my relationship to others. In August, Julian's solicitor informed us that Edmund's execution had been carried out. We said nothing, merely held each other that night and grieved for the waste of it all. A brilliant young man corrupted by greed and ambition, ending his life at the end of a rope. Thomas and Lenora dead because of one man's unwillingness to let love exist outside society's approved boundaries. An unborn child who never had the chance to draw breath. So much loss, so much unnecessary pain. But from that pain had come something unexpected. Julian and I had found each other, had built something real and lasting from the ruins of our separate griefs. Greymire Hall had been cleansed, its ghosts laid to rest, and I had discovered that I was not broken after all, merely waiting for someone who could see past the labels society had given me to the woman beneath. Autumn arrived with its usual display of color, the grounds of Greymire blazing with gold and crimson. On a clear October afternoon, exactly 1 year from the day I had first met Julian in my aunt's parlor, we rode out to the small churchyard where Lenora was buried. I had suggested it, wanting to pay my respects to the woman who had brought us together, and Julian had agreed, though I could see the visit pained him. Her grave was simple, a white marble stone engraved with her name and dates. Someone, perhaps the rector or one of the village women, had placed fresh flowers there. I added my own bouquet of roses from the Greymire gardens and stood looking down at the place where she rested. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you for choosing me, for trusting me with your truth, for giving Julian and me the chance to find each other. I hope you have found Thomas again, wherever you are. I hope you are together, you and he and the child you never got to hold. I hope you know peace." A breeze stirred the leaves around us, warm and gentle, and I felt something brush my cheek like a kiss or a whispered blessing. Julian's hand found mine, and we stood there together in the fading afternoon light, honoring the dead and celebrating the life we had been given. Winter came, and with it, the first anniversary of Lenora's death. We expected it to be difficult, anticipated possible return of the hauntings, or at least some sense of her presence. But the day passed quietly, marked only by our private remembrance. The house remained peaceful. No weeping in the walls, no cold spots or slamming doors. Lenora was truly at rest, and Greymire Hall had finally become what it was meant to be, not a monument to tragedy, but a home. It was in early spring, as the gardens began to wake and the first crocuses pushed through the soil, that I realized my courses were late. I said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to invite disappointment. But when 2 months passed with no sign of bleeding, I could no longer deny the possibility. I went to Dr. Pemberton in secret, unwilling to tell Julian until I was certain. The doctor examined me with his usual thoroughness, asked detailed questions about my symptoms, then sat back with a smile. "Congratulations, Lady Ravenswood. You are with child. I would estimate you are perhaps 10 weeks along, though it is difficult to be precise." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "That is not possible. The doctors in London told my husband, my former husband, that I could not conceive. Doctors can be wrong," he said gently. "The body is a mystery, and sometimes what seems impossible occurs anyway. But I can assure you, you are definitely carrying a child. You should expect to deliver sometime in late summer or early autumn." I walked back to Greymire in a daze, my hand pressed to my stomach where new life grew, life I had been told I could never create. The child might be a boy or a girl, healthy or frail, born easily or with difficulty. None of that mattered. What mattered was that I was not barren, had never been barren despite what my first husband's physicians had claimed. The failure had not been mine, and now I carried Julian's child, conceived in love rather than duty, wanted for itself rather than as mere continuation of a bloodline. I found Julian in the stables, overseeing repairs to one of the stalls. When he saw me, he smiled and came to meet me, his hands reaching for mine. "You look strange," he said, studying my face. "Has something happened?" "I am with child," I said simply, and watched the words register, watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to incandescent joy. He pulled me into his arms with a care that suggested I was made of spun glass, his face buried in my hair. I felt him shaking, felt wetness against my neck that told me he was weeping. "I thought," he began, then stopped, unable to continue. "I know." I held him tighter. I thought so too. But we were wrong, Julian. We were both wrong. We stood there in the stable yard while the horses stamped and snorted and the grooms pretended not to notice their master crying like a child. And I understood that this baby, whoever it turned out to be, was already precious beyond measure, not because it secured an inheritance or proved anything to society, but because it was ours, born of the love we had found in the unlikeliest of places. The pregnancy progressed without complication. I was sick in the mornings for the first few months, but Dr. Pemberton assured us this was normal and even healthy. Julian hovered over me with anxious devotion, insisting I rest more than necessary, forbidding me from climbing stairs unnecessarily, generally treating me as if I might shatter at any moment. I tolerated his fussing with amused patience, understanding it came from love and fear in equal measure. As my belly swelled and the baby began to move inside me, I thought often about Lenora and the child she had carried, the child that had died with her in that terrible fall from the tower. I thought about all the women throughout history who had been valued only for their fertility, who had been cast aside or worse when they failed to produce heirs, and I vowed that this child, boy or girl, would be raised knowing they were wanted for themselves, that their value was inherent and not dependent on what they could provide or produce. I gave birth on a warm September evening, with Dr. Pemberton in attendance and Mrs. Calloway serving as midwife. Julian paced the corridor outside, forbidden from the birthing room by custom, but close enough that I could hear his footsteps through the door. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when I feared I would not survive it, when I understood viscerally why so many women died bringing life into the world. But as the sun set and the first stars emerged, I brought forth a daughter. She was small and red-faced and absolutely perfect, with a powerful set of lungs that she demonstrated immediately upon entering the world. Dr. Pemberton placed her in my arms, and I looked down at her tiny face and felt love so overwhelming it stole my breath. Julian was allowed in moments later. He came to the bedside slowly, almost reverently, his eyes fixed on the bundle in my arms. When he saw his daughter's face, when he reached out one finger and she grasped it with her impossibly small hand, he made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "You are both beautiful." We named her Lenora Rose, honoring the woman whose death had brought us together and the roses that had bloomed in the Greymire gardens the day we married. Some might have found it morbid to name our child after Julian's murdered first wife, but it felt right to us both, a way of ensuring that Lenora's brief life and tragic death would not be forgotten. As I held my daughter and watched Julian marvel at her tiny features, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had been forsaken, cast aside as barren, sent away to fade into obscurity. I had been broken and hopeless, convinced I had no value beyond what I could not provide. And then a man with ghost-touched eyes had appeared in a storm and said, "Come with me," and everything had changed. I had found justice for a murdered woman. I had helped lay restless spirits to peace. I had discovered love with a man who saw me as I truly was and cherished me for it. And now I held the impossible made flesh, proof that the doctors had been wrong, that my body was not the failure I had been told it was. Little Lenora would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved. She would hear the story of the aunt she was named for, the woman who had been silenced but who had found her voice again through supernatural means. She would learn that justice mattered, that love mattered, that women's lives had value beyond their utility to men. And she would know, always, that she came from a line of women who had survived, who had fought, who had refused to be diminished by those who tried to break them. As autumn deepened and we settled into the rhythms of new parenthood, Greymire Hall seemed to embrace us with gentle warmth. The house that had been so full of sorrow and rage now rang with a baby's cries and laughter, with the sounds of life being lived rather than merely endured. We opened rooms that had been closed for years. We hosted small gatherings of neighbors and friends, and slowly the reputation of Greymire as a cursed place faded, replaced by stories of the Earl and Countess who had brought light back to the ancient halls. On the first anniversary of little Lenora's birth, we held a small celebration in the gardens. It was a beautiful autumn day, the kind where the light falls golden and the air smells of wood smoke and earth. Our daughter, now walking and beginning to talk in the garbled language of toddlers, tottered among the guests, charming everyone with her bright eyes and ready smile. As I watched her play, I felt Julian come up behind me, his arms encircling my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," I replied honestly. "A year ago I could not have imagined this, any of this, nor could I." He tightened his arms around me. "You saved me, Violet. Saved this house. Saved all of us from the darkness we were drowning in." "We saved each other," I corrected. "That is how love works, I think. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to walk together out of the dark." Our daughter squealed with delight as she discovered a butterfly in the roses. We watched her reach for it with chubby hands, laughing when it eluded her grasp and flew away. And in that moment, everything felt absolutely right. The ghosts were at peace, the living were healing, and Greymire Hall stood solid and beautiful in the autumn sun. No longer a prison, but a sanctuary. That night, after our guests had departed and little Lenora was asleep in her nursery, Julian and I walked through the house together, as we often did, checking windows and banking fires. We came to the Rose Room, the chamber that had been mine when I first arrived at Greymire, and stood looking out the window at the moonlit grounds. "Do you remember that first night?" Julian asked. "When you heard the weeping in the walls?" "I remember. I thought I had made a terrible mistake coming here. I thought I would flee at first light. But you stayed. But I stayed." I turned to face him. "And every choice I have made since then, every moment of fear and courage and hope has led to this, to you, to our daughter, to a life I never dared to dream of." He kissed me then, tender and deep, and I felt the same heat, the same pull that had been there from the beginning, that had drawn us together despite every obstacle and sorrow. When we parted, he kept his forehead pressed to mine, our breath mingling in the space between. "I love you, Violet Grey. I loved you when you were broken. I love you now that you are whole. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," I replied. "My ghost-touched Earl, my unexpected salvation, my home." We stayed there by the window as the moon climbed higher, and the house settled into sleep around us. And if somewhere in the quiet corners of Greymire a gentle presence watched over us, if Lenora's spirit lingered just long enough to ensure we were happy before departing for whatever lay beyond, neither of us saw it. We were too focused on each other, on the life we had built together from the ruins of our separate griefs. They had called me barren, and I had believed them. They had forsaken me, and I had accepted it as my due. But then a man with eyes that saw the dead had looked at me and seen life instead, had offered his hand and asked me to come with him into the darkness, and I had gone. And in that darkness, we had found each other, had found love and purpose and redemption. This is where my story should end, I suppose, with the romantic conclusion, the happy marriage, the impossible child. But stories do not really end. They simply continue beyond the last page. I will grow old with Julian at Greymire Hall. We will raise our daughter and perhaps other children to come. We will face new challenges and sorrows, as all living people must, but we will face them together, two souls who found each other in a haunted house and refused to let go. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light falls just right, I will glimpse a woman in white, walking the East Gallery or standing by the lake, and I will raise my hand in greeting, in acknowledgement, in gratitude, because Lenora gave us this life when she could have simply dragged us into death with her. She chose justice over vengeance, peace over eternal rage, and in doing so, she gave me the greatest gift I have ever received. She gave me back myself. She showed me that I was never broken, only waiting for someone who could see my worth. And for that, I will be grateful every day for the rest of my life. The ghosts are quiet now at Greymire Hall, but love is very loud indeed. It fills the rooms with laughter and warmth and the sound of small feet running down corridors that once echoed only with sorrow. And that, I have learned, is the truest exorcism of all. Not holy water or incantations, but simply choosing to live fully, to love without reservation, to believe that even the most haunted places can become home. They called me barren. They forsook me. But the Earl with the ghost-touched eyes said, "Come with me," and I went. And in going, I found everything I had been told I could never have. I found love. I found purpose. I found myself. And I found peace.